Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Sylvia Smith. I'm the Washington editor of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette and president of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-SPAN. We're looking forward to today's speech, and afterward I'll ask as many questions from the audience as time permits. Please hold your applause during the speech so that we can have as much time as possible for those questions. For our broadcast audience, I'd like to explain that if you hear applause, it may be from our guests or members of the general public who attend our events, not necessarily the working press. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Keith Hill, reporter-editor for BNA and chairman of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Rob Doherty, Washington bureau chief of Reuters. Janine Zakaria, diplomatic reporter for Bloomberg News. Peter Raffaelli, president and treasurer of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, and a guest of our speaker. Christine Cordner, senior editor covering climate change for Platts, and a brand new member of the National Press Club. His Excellency Petr Kolar, the Czech Republic ambassador to the United States and guest of our speaker. Angela Greiling-Keene of Bloomberg News and chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for a moment. Doris Margolis, president of Editorial Associates and the Press Club member who arranged today's luncheon. Fred Smith, president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute and a guest of our speaker. Myron Belkine, chairman of the Press Club International Correspondence Committee. Tony Walker, international editor of the Australian Financial Review. And Steve Sammy, editor and publisher of Military and Diplomat's World. Millions of Americans have roots in what is now the Czech Republic. But most Americans came to know this mid-sized European country through its first post-communist president, Vaclav Havel. In the U.S., Havel was the personification of the Velvet Revolution, the nonviolent overthrow of the communist government. When he spoke to our Congress, he was interrupted by standing ovations 21 times. The Velvet Revolution, though, was 20 years ago, and a lot's happened since then. For one, Czechoslovakia has become two states, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Czech Republic was voted into NATO and became a member of the European Union. Its economy is flourishing. Through all this, our speaker has been involved in one way or another with the evolution of the Czech Republic from communism to its present market-based economy. Vaclav Klaus was elected president of the Czech Republic in 2003 and won a second five-year term in February. During the communist era, he was a researcher at the Institute of Economics of the Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences, and later he worked in various positions at the Czechoslovak State Bank. Klaus began his career after the Velvet Revolution in 1989 as finance minister. In 1991, he co-founded the Civic Democratic Party. Klaus won parliamentary elections in 1992 and became prime minister. He has published 20 books on general social, political, and economic subjects, and in fact has discussed some of those here at the National Press Club. Among them is his controversial book, Blue Planet in Green Shackles: What is Endangered, Climate or Freedom? A passionate crusader against what he terms global warming alarmism, Klaus raises a skeptical eye at environmentalism. One widely quoted passage from his book says this: "The largest threat to freedom, democracy, the market economy, and prosperity at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century is no longer socialism. It is instead the ambitious, arrogant, unscrupulous ideology of environmentalism." We're interested to hear more. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome to our speaker, Vaclav Klaus, President of the Czech Republic.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure to be here. I'm just surprised to hear that I'm skeptical vis-a-vis environmentalism. I'm not skeptical. I'm totally against it. You know, the skeptical is an understatement. You know, which I would never use. You know. As I said, it's a real pleasure to be here. Let me thank all those who helped to make the English translation and publication of my book, Blue Planet in Green Shackles, possible, especially Fred Smith and his Competitive Enterprise Institute, and to thank those who co-organized the presentation of it in this very prestigious place. Thank you very much. I am really excited to finally hold in my hands, and I got it yesterday at the airport here in Washington for the first time, to hold in my hands, after the Czech, German, and Dutch editions, the English version of this book of mine. The authors often claim that their books speak for themselves. I cautiously agree, and will therefore speak not about the book itself, but about my motivations to write the book. To make my position and my message clear, and this is something what was mentioned in the introduction, I should probably revoke my personal experience. My today's thinking is fundamentally influenced by the fact that I spent most of my life under the communist regime, which ignored and brutally violated human freedom, and as I remember quite well, wanted to command not only the people, but also the nature. To command wind and rain is one of the famous slogans I remember since my childhood. This experience taught me that freedom and rational dealing with the environment are indivisible. It formed my relatively very sharp views on the fragility and vulnerability of free society, and gave me a special sensitivity to all kinds of factors which may endanger it. I would like to stress that I do not live in the past and do not see the future threats to free society coming from the old and old-fashioned communist ideology. The name of the new danger will undoubtedly be different, but its substance will be very similar. There will be the same attractive, to a great extent pathetic, and at first sight quasi-noble idea that transcends the individual in the name of something above him, of something greater than his poor self, supplemented by enormous self-confidence on the side of those who stand behind it. Like their predecessors, they will be certain that they have the right to sacrifice man and his freedom to make their idea reality. In the past, it was in the name of the masses or of the proletariat, this time in the name of the planet. Structurally, it is very similar. The current danger, as I see it, is environmentalism, and especially its strongest version, climate alarmism. Feeling very strongly about it and trying to oppose it was the main reason for putting my book together, originally in Czech language, in the spring of 2007. It has also been the driving force behind my active involvement in the current climate change debate, and behind my being the only head of state who in September 2007 at the UN Climate Change Conference in New York City openly and explicitly challenged the undergoing global warming hysteria. My central concern is, in a condensed form, as was mentioned by Madam President, captured in the subtitle of this book. I ask, what is endangered, and climate or freedom? And my answer is, it is our freedom, and I may add, and our prosperity. The book was written by an economist who happens to be in a relatively high political position. I don't deny my basic paradigm, my economic way of thinking, because I consider it an advantage, not a disadvantage. By stressing that, I want to say that the climate change debate in a wider and the only relevant sense should be neither about several tenths of a degree of Fahrenheit or Celsius, about the up and or down movements of sea level, about the depths of ice at north and southern poles, nor about the variations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The real debate is and should be about costs and benefits of alternative human actions, about how to rationally deal with the unknown future, about what kind and size of solidarity with much wealthier future generations is justified, about the size of externalities and their eventual appropriate internalization, about how much to trust the impersonal functioning of the markets in solving any human problem, including global warming, and how much to distrust the very visible hand of very human politicians and their bureaucrats. Some of these questions are touched upon in my book. My deep frustration has been exponentially growing in recent years by witnessing the fact that almost everything has already been said, that all rational arguments have been used, and that in spite of that, global warming is still marching on. It could be even true that we are now at the stage where mere facts, reason, and truth are powerless in the face of the global warming propaganda. We have probably and regretfully already reached that stage now. The whole process is already in the hands of those who are not interested in rational ideas and arguments. It is in the hands of climatologists and other related scientists who are highly motivated to look in one direction only, because a large number of academic careers has evolved around the idea of man-made global warming. It is further in the hands of politicians who, through the manipulation of people, maximize the number of votes they seek to get from the electorate. It is also, as a consequence of these political decisions, in the hands of bureaucrats, of national and more often of international institutions who try to maximize their budgets and years of careers as well, regardless the costs, truth, and rationality. It is finally in the hands of rent-seeking business people who are, given the existing policies, interested in the amount of subsidies they are receiving and look for all possible ways to escape the for them often merciless, but for the rest of us very positive, general welfare enhancing functioning of free markets. An entire industry has developed around the funds the firms are getting from the government. As I promised, I will not describe the book, Madam President, really. So, nevertheless, I have to say that the basic questions of the current climate change debate are sufficiently known and well structured. 4 of them are crucial. The question number 1, do we live in an era of a statistically significant, non-accidental and non-cyclical climate change? This is for me the question number 1. Question number 2, if so, is it dominantly man-made? Question number 3, if so, should such a moderate temperature increase bother us more than many other pressing problems we face, and should it receive our extraordinary attention? Question number 3. And the final question, if we want to change the climate, can it be done? And are current attempts to do so the best allocation of our scarce resources? My answers are somehow in the book, but to summarize them, I would say that my answer to all these questions is no. No, but with a difference in emphasis. I am not myself fighting about the first question. I don't aspire to measure the global temperature or to correct the measurements of climatologists. And I even do not estimate the relative importance of factors which influence it. I'm an economist, and I always try to maximize to take use of my comparative advantages. It's a mistake to do something else. And in those 2 questions, I don't have a comparative advantage. But to argue, as it is done by many contemporary environmentalists, that these questions have already been answered with a consensual yes, and that there is an unchallenged scientific consensus about this is unjustified. And not only unjustified, it is also morally and intellectually deceptive. And this is something what I can't live with. And therefore, my book and my involvement in this grand global warming debate. As I said, you may find some of my arguments concerning these issues in this book. I always suppose that it's much bigger, but it has 100 pages, whereas the Czech version has 150, and German version even more. And it may be that the English is more productive, more efficient language. That's one possible explanation, which probably creates the advantages of your great country, Madam President. When you have an efficient language, that may be good. But I understood that there is a different story. I have not yet seen in my life a book which has the letters of, which has the text so low to the end of the page and too much to one side or another. First, I must say, when I saw it at the airport yesterday night, I was rather disappointed. But now I understood that it's quite different, and I understood that I should be consistent. And I understood that Fred Smith, the president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the publisher of the book, is consistent also. And he is saving energy and paper and put as many letters on one page as is possible, and therefore the book looks shorter than it really is. This is a miraculous result, which I must say it took me, Fred, it took me several hours to understand that trick, but this is part of the story. We discussed that all of you, I understood, enjoyed having your water with ice. I was the only voice in the room today to ask, please, can I get it without ice? And then my neighbors at the table started to argue, this is very European, because in Europe they have small refrigerators and they don't have enough ice. And I said, Fred, to be consistent, you should go home this evening to throw away your big refrigerator and to buy a new small one. That's the only way how to follow prescriptions of Mr. Al Gore. Thank you very much for your attention.
You suggested that money is the motivating factor for budgets and careers behind scientists who describe a human role in global warming. But isn't money the motivating factor in businesses that oppose government actions to limit global warming?
Money is the motivating factors. Well, I would put it slightly more broadly to maximize the power and career is not just the monetary issue, because so that's not my crucial point. Well, but I don't think that the main factor of businesses is to oppose the actions. On the contrary, I am, to my great regret, convinced that we can somehow persuade the scientists that the scientific consensus is different. We can eventually persuade politicians. We can eventually persuade the bureaucrats. But I am afraid we will not be able to persuade the rent-seeking business people, because now they are the main supporters of the global warming hysteria, because they understood that it's the easiest way for their rent-seeking activities to maximize the number of subsidies to get, because of a perfect excuse, because of the so-called global warming. And 1 month ago I had a presentation of the Dutch edition of my book, and the person who introduced my speech there made a good point, because in the Netherlands the windmills have been for centuries, as we all know, and he tried to explain us that there are 10 times more windmills now, but they don't work, because the old Dutchmen understood where to put them. And now they try to put it all over the country where there is no wind, which means the activity is zero. And he made a perfect point, which I enjoyed very much. And it explains the story, it explains this question. His point was that the windmills are not run on wind, they are run on subsidies. I loved this statement, and this is the answer to that question.
Questioner wants to know, can you give us specific examples of how the green movement has impacted freedom, democracy, and/or the world market economy?
Well, this is for a 2-hour speech. This is not a way to summarize in one sentence or another. But the green movement is trying to dictate, control, regulate, mastermind our lives. You know, this is what we see every day. They want to discuss how many children we can have, because the man is a creature which damages the atmosphere because of breathing. They are dictating us what kind of cars we can use, how big the refrigerators we can have. I would expect very soon a legislation in the EU or in the United States about the allowed size of domestic refrigerators and so on. So I think that not to see it is for me not having eyes opened and not looking at the world around us. And if you look at the if you look at the, I speak as someone who lived in a communist era and who knows what it means to eliminate freedom, as someone who knows what it means to eliminate the market economy, someone who knows what it means to regulate, to command, to mastermind the economy from above. And if you look at such developments in the last several months, as the rising food prices all over the world, this is just the result of an important part, the result of the environmentalist thinking of switching to ethanol production and biofuels and competing with food production and so on and so on. One example after another for me.
Given what you've seen so far with the EU's emission trading scheme and its impact on the EU economy, what would you caution the United States as it designs a carbon program?
One thing is the idea whether it's necessary to limit the carbon dioxide emissions, and another issue is what kind of regulation to use. Those are two issues. So this author of this question probably assumes that the first question is settled, so that we have to do it. I am not so sure about it, but whether the tax system, to use the tax system, or to use the emissions trading cap and trade system, as you call it in this country, it's a technical question for an economist. For me, and it's mentioned in this book of mine, this cap and trade system, or the EU emissions trading scheme, is something which resembles very much the dreams of communist central planners. I don't know whether the economists here in this room remember the famous debate about socialism in the 1930s between, on the one hand, socialists, Lange, Oskar Lange, Polish-American, and Abba Lerner, American economist on the one hand, and Mises and Hayek on the other. So it was about the same idea. Can we try to play the market instead of letting the market to work and to function? And this idea of trading system with announcement of prices, trying to find the results, is something what we studied, economists in the communist era. We studied as a nonsense, and we tried to tell our political bosses that something like that can never work. And we forgot those studies in November 1989, in the moment of our Velvet Revolution, and I almost forgot my arguments, which I was full of at that time, and I never expect to use them again. But now with such trading schemes, we are again in a very, very similar system.
Questioner asks, do you differentiate between simple efforts to conserve energy, water, et cetera, and other resources, and what do you see as infringements on freedom? In other words, where do you draw the line?
Well, first, simple efforts to conserve energy, water, or to behave rationally is no violation of freedom. It's the basic element of human behavior ever. It's not necessary to impose upon anyone from above, It's not the trick. So the conservation of energy, saving energy, switching off the lights here on the corridor, Madam President, I'm doing it every day permanently, 10 times a day. You check your people here whether they didn't forget to switch off the energy. If yes, okay, I'm on your side. But it has nothing to do with environmentalism. Environmentalism is about a scheme organized from above, imposing upon us something else. And we, all of us, get a crucial information about the rational savings by the prices. It's crazy to tell someone to stop using oil in the moment when oil is 10 times more expensive now than it used to be several years ago. That's the information all of us are getting, and because all of us have a budget constraint, we have to rationally consume energy, which means we have to rationally save energy. If the income of the president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute is not big enough, he will buy a smaller refrigerator and he will save energy. But because his income is too big, he can have a big refrigerator and he can use a lot of ice in his water. It's that simple. It's not necessary to organize our life from above. I lived in such a system almost 50 years of my life. I don't want to live in such a system again.
Would you apply that kind of logic to all governmental programs and would you apply that logic to all governmental programs? In other words, is there in fact a role for a federal government?
Not just federal government, any government.
Well,
local, state, federal.
Is there?
All of them are as bad as the other. That's not the point. I know that you lived all your life in a world where you were used to discuss the market failure as a phenomenon, and there have been permanently attempts to correct some real or would-be market failures by government action. Government intervention. That was the spirit of the 20th century. I think that rational people and many American economists made a great contribution in this respect, started to study the opposite, started to study the government failure. And the issue is the market failure bigger and more dangerous than the government failure? You may have your experience, but my experience with half a century in communism, I know that government failure is incomparably worse than any market failure. So therefore, my position on any form, kind, motivation of government intervention is quite clear, to limit it as much as possible.
Questioner says, the Czech Republic has a growing manufacturing base. Does your viewpoint mean that industry won't be scrutinized for its environmental impact?
Well, if you work with statistics, you know, if you studied at least, if you had to pass at least one exam in statistics, you know some crucial points, and one of them is that it's always important to find the starting point, where you start to measure the statistical time series. We don't have here any blackboard or anything else. So, you know, the Czech Republic has a growing manufacturing base. Is an incorrect statement. Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia was the most industrialized country in the former communist bloc countries. Our manufacturing base, measured by the share of workers working in manufacturing, was highest in the world. So what we had to do after the fall of communism was radically restructure the society and the economy. So in our country was a dramatic deindustrialization. Practically our heavy industry practically disappeared in several years after the fall of communism. So we used to have a very high share of manufacturing, then we had a rapid decline, and there is a small increase. So to describe our country as a growing manufacturing base is not exactly the correct statement, but that there is no, if you don't expect miracles in emissions intensity. Emissions intensity means a share of emissions intensity per GDP per capita or something like that. If you don't expect miracles of emissions intensity, which is like expecting any miracle, a nonsense. You know. So the only way how to limit the carbon dioxide emissions is to decelerate economic growth and to deindustrialize the world. So that's the only way how to do it. Miracles can't be expected. I had a talk this morning at Cato Institute, and there was an idea about what about this form of technology to create unlimited amount of energy. My answer to that was okay. If we finally discovered the perpetuum mobile, that's great. It means the whole society will be changed. There will be no scarcity. There will be no economics, nothing like that. But this is not our reality. And the correlation between the rate of economic growth and CO2 emissions has been very strong. Let's try to make it less dramatic. Let's try to increase the emissions intensity and the emissions efficiency, and we will have better results. Nevertheless, to get rid of that relationship seems to me impossible. So the more CO2 regulation, the less industry, definitely.
Do you apply the same logic to other forms of pollution? In other words, I think in this country anyway, the correlation between factory emissions into the water and dirty water, poor drinking water, is well established. Would you suggest that there is no role for government in that kind of pollution control?
Well, first, I think that the experience tells us that with the increasing wealth, with the improving technologies, there has been an improvement all over the world in all indicators of environmental damage, in all indicators. The question is whether we can dictate that situation. If you look in my book at page number, I don't know, somewhere at the beginning, page number 9, there are air pollution trends in the Czech Republic in the last 15 years. So we were one of the worst polluters in the world in the communist era. Now there is a radical improvement. So I don't deny all kinds of methods to improve that, but it was basically done by the rationally functioning market system, but by clearly defining the private property, by introducing the rational price system. That the role of the environmental legislation was relatively visibly smaller than the systemic changes which we introduced in our country. So legislation, there are all kinds of legislation, and some of them is positive, some of them not. But when I hear some of your candidates for president to promise what kind of emission reduction should be in the year 2020, 2015, 2080, I can't imagine anything like that. Here's one exception: miracles.
Speaking of 2020, the 2020 by 20, which the questioner wants to know, is that a reachable goal? And for those in the audience who might not know, that's a program to reduce consumption by 20% and increase energy from renewables by 20%, all by the year 2020.
Well, it's This is a typical, not the question, but the thinking about 2020 and 20% decrease in emissions. You know, it's a typical trick because 150 or I don't know how many countries, Fred, signed the Kyoto Protocol. More than 100 countries, I would guess. Yeah, more than 100 countries signed the Kyoto Protocol, asking for 7% decrease in CO2 emissions between 1990 and 2012. 7%. Until now, practically no country in the world, with two exceptions, is fulfilling the signed Kyoto Protocol. One type of countries who succeeded in fulfilling the Kyoto Protocol are the small states. One of them is Luxembourg. Luxembourg has one power plant because the number of people living in Luxembourg is 300,000. It's 5 blocks here, probably, or in one direction or another, you know. So when you have a power plant in a country, in such a tiny country, based on coal, and you restructure it and use gas, because you have just one power plant, you easily fulfill Kyoto Protocol. So let's exclude those such small countries, because this is not a real issue. And there is the second group of countries for fulfilling the Kyoto Protocol. Paradoxically, my country is one of them, and the all other post-communist countries in Central, Eastern, and Southern Europe, because of what I just explained before. After the radical economic restructuring and transformation connected with the fall of communism, elimination of heavy industry, the fall of GDP. In my country, the GDP fell in the first 3 years after the Velvet Revolution by one third. Can you imagine? 1/3 decline in GDP in the United States. Unimaginable. So those countries are fulfilling the Kyoto Protocol as well. So what would you prescribe the countries to do that? Either such a dramatic, fundamental economic restructuring as was done involuntarily at the moment of the fall of communism. I wouldn't suggest you to follow that story. And let's exclude a small country. So no other country is following the Kyoto Protocol as far as I know. And where is the trick? When we are not able to decrease the carbon dioxide emissions till the year 2012 by 7%, so what's the best behavior of politicians? To forget the 2012 goal and to start talking about 2020 and decrease by 20%. It's the trick, you know, in politics, as a very successful trick. This is everything this is what I see is behind all of that.
How will your view on global warming influence what the EU does during the Czech Republic's roving presidency next year?
Well, I think that the global warming mantra is so deeply already in the EU structures that I don't believe that our presidency in the first half of the year 2009 can radically change that situation.
Questioner asks, do you see any dangers to the environment?
We know, I would say that we know hundreds of examples of very bad dealing with the environment in our life. All of us meet that every day. But another issue is whether the mankind is destroying the planet. That's a totally different story than using too much ice. That's a problem which can be easily solved. But I don't believe that the man is destroying the planet, and environmentalism is based not on small issues of saving electricity here in the National Press Club, or of cleaning one pond or lake water. That's not environmentalism. Environmentalism is an ideology which wants to control the world.
Our Congress is working on legislation regarding money for a missile defense site in the Czech Republic, less money, in fact, than the Bush administration wants. The Senate version would require Poland and the Czech Republic parliaments to ratify this plan. What's your reaction to the funding cut and the conditions that many in Congress want to set?
Well, this is not about this book, I'm
Right.
afraid.
Moving on.
I am trying in vain to find an page discussing the missile, the radar system in the Czech Republic. Well, I don't want to influence the EU legislators and their difficult budgetary decisions. As someone who used to be the Minister of Finance, I would be very much against anyone telling me from outside how I should divide the national budget. So this is not my intention to make any comment on that. We accept it, or I would say the government accepted, and it's in the process of being approved, or not potentially, but I believe approved in the parliament. And for us, the changes of conditions from outside is a complication, but this is not my issue. I would like to discuss here.
But a lot of people are interested, and I suspect that the members of Congress' egos will manage to decide what they're going to do, no matter what any of us say. But someone wants to know if the radar system of the missile defense program is in your country's best interest.
I am sure you know that such an issue as to build a military defense system in a country, it's definitely an issue where the people are divided, and it's quite natural. And you know that your country is divided on many issues, starting with the Iraq war to I don't know what. So it's quite natural that the public opinion in the Czech Republic is divided. 1 point. Point number 2. You live in a world, in a democracy. We do as well. And it's quite normal then when the government, in our case the governing coalition, is suggesting something, the opposition is against it. I'm sure you know that issue as well. So typical case in our country. Now the government is supporting that idea, and the opposition is trying to kill the government in any possible issue with any possible topic. So that the opposition is against it is again quite normal and nothing special. I would say that the general feeling in the country, again connected with our past, that we feel very strongly about our transatlantic relationship. We feel very strongly about our friendship with your great country, and in this respect we take the radar system in our country as an argument in this friendly relationship between our two countries. Discussions about whether the missiles in North Korea or Iran, or I don't know where, are dangerous today, will be dangerous tomorrow, or in the year 2000, I don't know, 17, is beyond my thinking. But for us, it's something cementing our friendship with the United States of America.
The questioner wants to know when will the Parliament vote on this and will it pass? But you've already answered the will it pass, I think.
I expect it.
And you know when the will
When? Yes, we are really a democratic country, and to dictate the Parliament what to do.
How about to predict?
If I say they will pass it at the end of June, they will hear it, today in Prague. They will enjoy postponing it till autumn. So
let's be on the record, there were no predictions. News reports said you will not attend the opening ceremonies of the Beijing Olympics. Were you planning to go, and why did you decide not to?
This is a strange question. I must say that I haven't attended the opening ceremonies of the World Ice Hockey Championship in Quebec. I don't plan to see the final games of the Stanley Cup here, and many other important sport events. So that's all what I would like to say. On the other hand, I don't think it's fair now after deciding 10, 15 years ago to give the Olympic Games to China, to be brave sufficient now suddenly, and to say that there is no sufficient freedom in China and to block the Olympic Games. That's not my way of looking at things. The degree of democracy in China today is definitely much bigger than it used to be 15 years ago when it was approved that the Olympics will be in China, and I try to be consistent in my life.
Questioner says, given your experience with the peaceful division of the former Czechoslovakia into two separate countries, do you have any suggestions as to how to duplicate this feat in creating a peaceful Palestinian state?
That's a daring ambition. So I'm sorry I was re-elected for the second term because otherwise I would volunteer to go to the Middle East to solve the dramatic situation there. My experience in this respect is nevertheless important, I would guess. And this experience is anything like that must be done at home. Anything like that must come from inside. I simply don't believe in the possibility of bringing solutions from outside, because it can never work, it can never be accepted by the countries in question. And I understood very well in the year 1992 as Prime Minister that to avoid any trouble between the Czechs and Slovaks, my task is to do it as fast as possible, not to let any great advisors from abroad to come and to tell us what to do. So we made it so rapidly that all those would-be savers of the world, were flexible enough to come there and to try to tell us what to do. We did it ourselves, and I'm afraid that the attempt to do it differently in the Middle East has absolutely no chance to succeed.
Here's another conflict question. What would resolve the conflict between Greece and Macedonia regarding the name of the latter country?
Well, I was sitting at the NATO summit in Bucharest, Romania, 6-8 weeks ago, and so I participated in the discussions. I don't have a solution to. Can you imagine to be there was the president and prime minister of Macedonia? Can you imagine that they are in Bucharest, and then a group of guys heads of states, heads of governments, tell them, you should change the name of your country. And they say, okay, and go home and to make a television address, say, we didn't like it, nevertheless we accepted that the name of our country is wrong, and we will accept another name. This is unimaginable. So for me, there is no solution to that game, which I don't like and don't enjoy.
Questioner wants to know, aside from the publication of your book, what do you hope to accomplish on your visit to the U.S., and what will you say to Vice President Cheney? I understand you're meeting with him.
I'm meeting him tomorrow morning. First, I will give him the book, and I hope that he will study it, and he will, in the remaining 6 months of this presidency, will make radical changes in the environmental policy. That would be a great achievement, nevertheless. But definitely I don't expect anything like that. Well, we have several issues, bilateral issues between our two countries on the one hand, and of course we have some positions on the international issues as well. So we will definitely talk about all of them, but we will spend some time discussing this issue as well.
We're almost out of time, but before asking the last question, I have a couple of important matters to take care of. First, let me remind club members of future speakers. On June 2nd, we have the Vice President, in fact, Dick Cheney.
You should ask him whether he already...
I think we'll ask him if he's read the book. On June 5th, Sharon Rockefeller, President and Chief Executive Officer of WETA, will discuss the role of public media in our democracy. And on June 9th, Brian Montgomery, Assistant Secretary of the Federal Housing Administration, will be with us. Second, I'd like to present our guest with our coveted National Press Club mug.
Thank you very
for your
much.
coffee.
Thank you very much.
And then let me ask you the last question. If you found yourself on an airplane sitting next to Al Gore, what do you think you'd talk about?
Well, of course, I met him in the past many times, so there will be not a special question. I many times tried to talk, to have a public exchange of views with him, and he's not too much willing to make such a conversation. So I'm ready to do it.
Well, thank you so much for coming, President Klaus. Thank you, President Klaus, and thank you, audience, for coming. I'd also like to thank National Press Club staff members Melinda Cook, Pat Nelson, Joanne Booz, and Howard Rothman for organizing today's lunch. Also, thanks to the NPC Library for its research. The video archive of today's luncheon is provided by National Press Club's Broadcast Operations Center. Many of our events are aired on XM satellite radio and available for free download on iTunes, as well as on our website. Non-members may purchase transcripts, audio, and videotapes by reaching the archives at press.org. For more information about the Press Club, please go to our website, www.press.org. Thank you. We're adjourned. Lovely to meet you. Go out and go over to the next room.
Therefore, speak not about the book itself, but about my motivations to write the book. To make my position and my message clear, and this is something what was mentioned in the introduction, I should probably revoke my personal experience. My today's thinking is fundamentally influenced by the fact that I spent most of my life under the communist regime, which ignored and brutally violated human freedom, and as I remember quite well, wanted to command not only the people, but also the nature. to command wind and rain is one of the famous slogans I remember since my childhood. This experience taught me that freedom and rational dealing with the environment are indivisible. It formed my relatively very sharp views on the fragility and vulnerability of free society, and gave me a special sensitivity to all kinds of factors which may endanger it. I would like to stress that I do not live in the past and do not see the future threats to free society coming from the old and old-fashioned communist ideology. The name of the new danger will undoubtedly be different, but its substance will be very similar. There will be the same attractive, to a great extent pathetic, and
Good afternoon, and welcome to the National Press Club. My name is Sylvia Smith. I'm the Washington editor of the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette and president of the National Press Club. I'd like to welcome club members and their guests today, as well as those of you who are watching on C-SPAN. We're looking forward to today's speech, and afterward I'll ask as many questions from the audience as time permits. Please hold your applause during the speech so that we can have as much time as possible for those questions. For our broadcast audience, I'd like to explain that if you hear applause, it may be from our guests or members of the general public who attend our events, not necessarily the working press. I'd now like to introduce our head table guests and ask them to stand briefly when their names are called. From your right, Keith Hill, reporter-editor for BNA and chairman of the National Press Club Board of Governors. Rob Doherty, Washington bureau chief of Reuters. Janine Zakaria, diplomatic reporter for Bloomberg News. Peter Raffaelli, president and treasurer of the American Friends of the Czech Republic, and a guest of our speaker. Christine Cordner, senior editor covering climate change for Platts, and a brand new member of the National Press Club. His Excellency Petr Kolar, the Czech Republic ambassador to the United States and guest of our speaker. Angela Greiling-Keene of Bloomberg News and chairwoman of the National Press Club Speakers Committee. Skipping over our speaker for a moment. Doris Margolis, president of Editorial Associates and the Press Club member who arranged today's luncheon. Fred Smith, president of the Competitive Enterprise Institute and a guest of our speaker. Myron Belkind, chairman of the Press Club International Correspondence Committee. Tony Walker, international editor of the Australian Financial Review. And Steve Sammy, editor and publishes this: "The largest threat to freedom, democracy, the market economy, and prosperity at the end of the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century is no longer socialism. It is instead the ambitious, arrogant, unscrupulous ideology of environmentalism." We're interested to hear more. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm National Press Club welcome to our speaker, Vaclav Klaus, President of the Czech Republic.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, it's really a great pleasure to be here. I'm just surprised to hear that I'm skeptical vis-a-vis environmentalism. I'm not skeptical. I'm totally against it. You know, that skeptical is an understatement. You know, which I would never use. You know, as I said, it's a real pleasure to be here. Let me thank all those who helped to make the English translation and publication of my book, Blue Planet in Green Shackles, possible, especially Fred Smith and his Competitive Enterprise Institute, and to thank those who co-organized the presentation of it in this very prestigious place. Thank you very much. I am really excited to finally hold in my hands, and I got it yesterday at the airport here in Washington for the first time, to hold in my hands, after the Czech, German, and Dutch editions, the English version of this book of mine. The authors often claim that their books speak for themselves. I cautiously agree and will
of military and diplomats world. Millions of Americans have roots in what is now the Czech Republic. But most Americans came to know this mid-sized European country through its first post-communist president, Vaclav Havel. In the U.S., Havel was the personification of the Velvet Revolution, the nonviolent overthrow of the communist government. When he spoke to our Congress, he was interrupted by standing ovations 21 times. The Velvet Revolution, though, was 20 years ago, and a lot's happened since then. For one, Czechoslovakia has become two states, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. The Czech Republic was voted into NATO and became a member of the European Union. Its economy is flourishing. Through all this, our speaker has been involved in one way or another with the evolution of the Czech Republic from communism to its present market-based economy. Vaclav Klaus was elected president of the Czech Republic in 2003 and won a second 5-year term in February. During the communist era, he was a researcher at the Institute of Economics of the Czechoslovak Academy of Sciences, and later he worked in various positions at the Czechoslovak State Bank. Klaus began his career after the Velvet Revolution in 1989 as finance minister. In 1991, he co-founded the Civic Democratic Party. Klaus won parliamentary elections in 1992 and became prime minister. He has published 20 books on general social, political, and economic subjects, and in fact has discussed some of those here at the National Press Club. Among them is his controversial book, Blue Planet in Green Shackles: What is Endangered, Climate or Freedom? A passionate crusader against what he terms global warming alarmism, Klaus raises a skeptical eye at environmentalism. One widely quoted passage from his book said,
at first sight, quasi-noble idea that transcends the individual in the name of something above him, of something greater than his poor self, supplemented by enormous self-confidence on the side of those who stand behind it. Like their predecessors, they will be certain that they have the right to sacrifice man and his freedom to make their idea reality. In the past, it was in the name of the masses or of the proletariat, this time in the name of the planet. Structurally, it is very similar. The current danger, as I see it, is environmentalism, and especially its strongest version, climate alarmism. Feeling very strongly about it and trying to oppose it was the main reason for putting my book together, originally in Czech language, in the spring of 2007. It has also been the driving force behind my active involvement in the current climate change debate and behind my being the only head of state who in September 2007 at the UN Climate Change Conference in New York City openly and explicitly challenged the undergoing global warming hysteria. My central concern is in a condensed form, as was mentioned by Madam President, captured in the